And we're live. Hello. Are we live? Does not say we are live. Okay, now it says we are live. Amazing. 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 Now, where do I find the live stream link for this? I have no clue. This is how I found it last time. Is that okay, this is not how I found it last time, because I evidently cannot find it again. This is amazing. This is okay. We once again have stream. Okay. Oh, I should have one of these days. I should have the thumbnail be the Ampharos. The okay. Wait, do you guys know about the Ampharos? It's this guy. This little guy. He's podcasting. Welcome to the stream. Welcome. It is Ampharos time. We were talking about the current thing as well. Much more so this time than earlier today. Earlier today was not really a current thing stream. I did answer like 3 questions from the people. That was about and like 2 or like 3 questions about the current thing. But there is an angle to the current thing now, which I think is actually talking about. Unlike the angle before, which was mostly people just like making shit up. Okay. So in the stream, I will basically just read some tweets. I don't know what you expected. But it's a current thing stream. I may also play some Sudoku. I don't know. Depends on how I'm feeling. Just waiting for people to trickle in. There's 2 tweets that basically inspired me to actually do the stream, because for a while, and I mentioned this in the first stream, you know, the current thing is kind of boring and it's kind of like dishonest. Like, not even just dishonest as in like just like factually wrong, but dishonest in that like people are not really talking about the thing that they actually care about. An exception to that, a great exception, is Adrian Vermeulen, who had this pretty good take in response to a Vivek tweet, which we will also read. Maybe we should read the Vivek tweet first. Nah. But let's just read the Vermeulen tweet. The Vermeulen tweet is a lot shorter. Nerds should be on tap, not on top, and I say that as an incorrigible nerd myself. This is actually broader than the immigration issue. Okay, that's very important. And I think that kind of speaks to what you're talking about. It has to do with what sort of elite, what sort of ruling class a nation ought to have. One trained on to statesmanship and judgment, or one trained to merely technical competence. So this is a great tweet in several ways. It makes several important points that I think are going to outline, this entire chat. This entire stream is like, oh no, don't do that. But this entire stream is like, the Adrian Vermeule chat stream, or the Adrian Vermeule tweet stream. Okay, it is, yeah. So there's a question of who should rule, broader than the immigration issue. How does this relate to the immigration issue? How does this relate to the current thing? What is the derangement of the current thing? So on. What sort of elite, what sort of ruling class a nation ought to have? Statesmanship and judgment, or trained to merely technical competence? So there's a few things implied there. And we'll get into that. So there's also let me go back. This is the Amphara. This guy is going to be, I don't know if he'll be the show mascot or he'll just be the next stream's thumbnail. Comes from an art called Mary's Broadcast, I think. Called something like this. Oh, Mary's Request. Like this is where the art comes from. This is a real card from like the real Nintendo Pokemon TCG. This is where the image comes from. He's just podcasting. This was from 2005. He's just podcasting. Okay. Let's actually talk about the stream. How do we achieve greatness? In this chat, we stand and for. There's your answer. We achieve greatness by doing the Ampharos. Okay. By celebrating the Ampharos. By following in the path of Ampharos. Okay. Okay. So let's read this Vivek tweet. I know I said I would stop reading things 2 streams ago. But there are exceptions. The reason top tech companies often hire foreign-born and first-generation engineers over, quote, native Americans isn't because of an innate American IQ deficit, a lazy and wrong explanation. A key part of it comes from the C word, culture. Tough questions demand tough answers, and we're very serious about fixing the problem. We have to confront the truth. Our American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence for way too long. At least since the 90s and likely longer. Recall what I said about, cultures literally murdering excellent people in literally 1 stream ago. Literally 3 hours ago. I don't think this is really an American thing. This is like most of the world. That doesn't start in college, it starts young. A culture that celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad champ or jock over the valedictorian will not produce the best engineers. This is mostly saying the same thing. American culture, the idea is that American culture venerates the jock or the prom queen. It's interesting because there's the meme of the jock and then there's actual competitive athletes, right? The actual best athletes in the country are very admirable and serious people. And I would say smart people. Many of them would make competent engineers. Maybe not as good as, they make athletes. That acquires a certain kind of, physical condition and physical gift as well. So it's not a 100% overlap. But to be a top athlete, with few exceptions. To be a top athlete, you actually have to be quite a smart person. But there's the meme of the jock, which is pretty dumbheaded and the kind of everyman, and is not actually competent, right? And that's pretty different. So I think Vivek makes it clear that it's the TV jock, not the actual top athlete. The actual top athlete, I think, could be a very very admirable and very competent leader. Normalcy doesn't cut it in a hyper-competitive global market for technical talent, and if we pretend like it does, we'll have our asses handed to us by China. This can be our Sputnik moment. I have written about this specifically, about the Sputnik moment specifically. We've awakened from slumber before, and we can do it again. Trump's election hopefully marks the beginning of a new golden era in America, but only if our culture fully wakes up. A culture that prioritizes achievement over normalcy, excellence over mediocrity, nerdiness over conformity, hard work over laziness. That's the work we have cut out for us, rather than wallowing in victimhood and wishing our legislative alternative hiring practices into existence. I'm confident we can do it. To point out multiple boomer TV favorites for comparison and realism. Yeah, this is such a boomer take. It's a boomer take. It is... I don't know, like... It really is the previous medium, right? We're not talking about Twitter posters, we're not talking about YouTubers, we're not talking about, like, admiring Mr. Beast. Which, by the way, Mr. Beast is kind of in the category of, like, a professional athlete. Like, Mr. Beast is, like, clearly a very competent and smart person. Like, he's a kind of celebrity, and, you know, there's a meme version of him which is kind of superficial. But, like, Mr. Beast, the actual person, is, like, you know, a hyper-competent person, obviously. You should read the, like, Mr. Beast Guide to Production, or whatever. It's very good. And, you know, the results speak for themselves. But, like, okay, there's a kind of directional idea here, which I think is right, that, like, you know, people celebrate mediocrity and conformity. Is that a particularly American thing? No. And I think it's, like, it's a thing I associate with Europe. Like, Europe celebrates conformity much more. You just look at, like, the culture of, like, you know, so the private schools in the UK are called public schools, which is really dumb. But they're basically their version of private schools are just, like, really stupid and focused on decorum and produce mediocre people. And, like, quite frankly, like, Rishi deserves to rule over them. Like, this is not necessarily true in the American context, but, like, if we're just talking about, like, the British culture is just, like, unbelievably untalented and mediocre. However, the same is just not true for the American culture. Like, the American culture is generally much more dynamic and generally much more competent and much more meritocratic than Vivek makes it out to be. I don't know why. Like, I'm not talking about, like, the meme culture now. I'm talking about, like, the real, actual American culture. And there's, like, some, like, you know, DEI, like, cultural left-wing stuff in schools now. But I think just, like, in the culture, people want to do something. America is one of the few countries left where megalothymia is a real thing. And in terms of suffocating cultures, I think America is one of the less suffocating ones. However, there's the question of whether that ambition is channeled towards technical talent or not. It's, you know, it's like, you know, it's like MIT versus Harvard, right? Harvard, it's interesting because Harvard is not just, you know, a technical school. Like, they have competent, like, math departments or whatever, but it's a kind of conformity test. It just is. And it's not really conforming to, like, jock culture. It's conforming to, like, left-wing culture. These are shows that Vivek's elementary school peers were watching. That's what he's upset about. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. Here's what makes it kind of understandable, which is, like, to some degree, you know, most people are just average. And that's, like, there's this idea that, like, Indian cultures or, like, Asian cultures in general pressure people towards, like, more excellence and less conformity. And, like, part of that is true, especially when it comes to technical talent. You know, there's this meme that comes up all the time of, like, the US Math Olympiad team, and it's just, like, it's like 5 East Asians out of 6. If not 6. It's, like, mostly East Asians. It's interesting, by the way, that, like, until very, very recently, like Chinese Americans were much better than like actual Chinese people at much better than Chinese nationals at the Math Olympiad. That's like kind of changed recently. This page always takes so fucking long to load. The Computer Science Olympiad page loads instantly, which maybe tells you something about relative competence. Okay, no, I'm just like messing with people. But okay, let's go to the country results. This is also lagging like hell. Every other page loads instantly, by the way. But it is like very interesting that for a very long time, this is like pretty much strictly a cultural comparison, because it was like, there's some selection effect here, but it was like, Canadian, or it's like American Chinese immigrants, or like, second generation, third generation immigrants mostly, versus like Chinese nationals. And for a long time, the U.S. won this year too, but for a long time, the American Chinese were better. What does that tell you about, relative cultural competence, relative ability, so on? Just asking questions. Wait, India was fourth in the IMO this year. That's actually remarkable. India does not usually do that well. India usually does like pretty badly at the IMO. But like, there's a concept here that I think is correct, and that concept is like, we should have even less tall poppy syndrome. We should be even less like the British, which is not American, by the way. George Grant talks about this. We talked about it in the first stream. George Grant talks about this, about like the Canadian nationalist project being like a kind of like anti-American counter-revolution, and I think to a large degree that's the post-war British project as well. That there is a real thing as American dynamism, and actually, a lot of Canadians look at that and say, actually, we want less meritocracy and less change, and I think the UK is kind of similar. The UK is kind of like a boomer protection racket, even more than the US is. However, to return to the main point, just because we're much better than the UK, and I would say better than India, and certainly better than China at actually encouraging competence, doesn't mean we shouldn't do it more. But that actually gets to an interesting point, which is what kind of competence. And I like the way Vermeulen phrased this. There are a few people who talked about the same direction of thing, but Vermeulen makes like 3 points, right? First of all, nerds should be on tap, not on top, so, not necessarily ruling, but contributing. This is broader than the immigration issue, which I think is obviously true. And then, what elite should we have? Statesmanship and judgment, or technical competence? So that's like the roadmap for the episode. So, well, I think we already talked about like this not just being like the immigration thing. I think it's true that like there's a lot of people who like are posting about immigration who are like not really honest about their actual motivations. They're like arguing. I mentioned this in the first stream, but they're like arguing that like, oh, there aren't actually Indian startup founders. That's just not true. That's just not true. That is simply false. I read the tweet from Aravind Srinivas, an Indian immigrant, Indian American who founded Perplexity, which is the third or fourth most used AI project or AI tool today. And so like some people are just saying things that aren't true, and the reason why they're saying that and pretending to like care so deeply about things that they know nothing about is because they actually care about something else and don't really like want to comfortably say it. And I just want them to comfortably say it. They should just say like, oh, we actually want like a ruling class that is ordained by different things, and that may be ordained by like by ethnicity, that may be ordained by faith. That's kind of Vermeulen's project, right? Is like Catholic integralism. I'm not sure if he would say that, but like something in that direction of um, enforcing like Catholic values through the state. Um, so yeah, do we want statesmanship or judgment, or do we want just technical competence? Do we just want like, is the only thing that we care about just like getting the job done, or like are there other things? I think that at a political level, it's obvious we want other things, right? We elect the president. We don't just like we don't just we don't just make the president like whoever won the last IMO. We don't just make you don't just make Elon Musk president. In fact, Elon Musk can't be president because he wasn't born in the U.S. So it's clear that at a political level, we care more about we care more than just technical competence. But the question is like how much should we care about this when we're thinking about on one hand immigration, on another hand a kind of like a kind of real ruling class or counter elite, however you put it, of like the people who succeed in Silicon Valley. That's the question I pose to all of you. Okay, just to let you know, your audio is very quiet. Okay, I will try to change that. Is my audio less? It's certainly much louder on my end. So on my end, it's like pretty loud. Hopefully you guys can hear it as well. Okay. A broad philosophy education should be required, to be honest. Some of these guys can only do math, are really bad at other things. Yeah. I am for a very long time. Like I grew up in a lot of math Olympiad circles, in a lot of like computer science Olympiad circles, especially, and for a long time, like basically since my childhood, the kind of like I was kind of like the envoy from the real world, like teaching all these guys like how to act in the real world, because like to be real, and this is like oddly true for like top athletes as well. You have to be like pretty antisocial to be like a top athlete. Just like you have to do to be a top math Olympiad person, so on. And your conception of human nature is also going to be very, very different. This is true of tech as well. You just like don't understand the kind of like human evil that's out there. That's just not something that people understand, and the kind of social games that people play. It is just it is like it really is like explaining the shit to an alien. And I don't know why I avoided this fate. I really don't know. Maybe it's just because like I've always kind of been interested in human nature and philosophy and so on, and I actually read the stuff. It's like, I don't know. I just always thought, there's one behavior that's like, you see all of this crazy, unpredictable stuff, irrational stuff, and you just like retreat from it. And then there's another tendency, which is like you try to find out what's going on, right? And I would say that I have much more of the latter. And I would say that I, at least did a lot better than many of these people at finding out what's going on. Part of that is also standing on the shoulders of giants and actually reading this stuff. But yeah, that is a conundrum. That is a real thing that happens very often. It really makes difference. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Half of the previous stream was like, you should read Hobbes and you should read Plato and you should read Strauss, and here's why. Maybe we're gonna do a lot of that this stream as well. So the question is like, okay, so this is clearly part of your political theory. This is clearly part of your political judgment. Like, we live in a democracy. We don't live in a, well, some people would say we do live in an aristocracy or an oligarchy, and that's fair to some degree as well. But we don't live in like an explicit meritocracy, right? You could imagine a world where, like, the winner of the math Olympiad just becomes the president. And that's, like, clearly not what we have. And I think actually, like, the math Olympiad people wouldn't want to live in such a world. Most people wouldn't want to live in such a world. We could just elect the person who wins the math Olympiad. Actually, probably not, because they'd be too young. But, like, we could do something similar. And we just don't, right? We just choose not to. And I think there's a good reason for that. Like, when Vermeule was talking about, this as a legal system, as a political system, obviously true. Everyone would agree with Vermeule there. The question is, like, how about immigration, right? So notably, we do have, like, different immigration pathways. We have, immigration for technical skills. We have just, like, general lottery immigration. We have, like, immigration for we have, like, the O1 visa, which the ChatGPT O1 is named after. Which is, basically, like, even more high-skilled immigration. It's an alien of extraordinary ability. That's the actual description of it. An immigrant with extraordinary ability, basically. And it's like an even higher level than like the H1 visas. And the H1 visas basically require like job sponsorships. It requires like it's like a software company saying like, yeah, this guy we vouch for this guy's talented. The O1 visa is like more than that. It's like, I have a Nobel Prize, or like I have like not that extreme, but like I have major scientific papers. I have a successful startup that I want to move to the U.S. So these are people who are like even higher skilled, and we have lanes for those people as well. O1 also, funnily enough, is also the Olympic athlete visa. It is just like anything exceptional. It's not just software. It's not just software or math or sciences. It's like anything. You can get it for like philosophers, academics of all sorts, humanities. You can get it for novelists and artists and like literally athletes. That's literally one of the things that they list. So it's the jock nerd convergence. I keep saying this like over and over again, but this is just like very, very true. There is just like and I get like why Vivek says this. This is like a cultural thing. This is like a sitcom thing where they kind of portray jocks as like blockheads. But like and that may even be true at like a local level, right? That may even be true at like, a school level, or maybe even like a county level. But if you are like, the state champion in like football or something, you're probably like pretty competent. And if you're like a literal like Olympic athlete, you're going to be very competent. I don't know like how many times I have to say that. And this is both from like people who I know personally, and just from like, a lot of these people like go on to do like actual research. They go on to have like successful companies. Yeah, like top like truly top athletes are like very confident people. I bookmarked a certain number of tweets. We can look at these as well. Okay. There are a bunch of just like bangers from Jeremy Kaufman that don't really like relate to any point I have, but yeah. Well, this one is actually just like a good tweet. I should like this. Immigration debate highlights the deeper problem of America. Why does it keep removing my like? What? Okay, if America isn't just an economic zone, then immigrants need to integrate. But integrate to what? What does it mean to be an American in 2024? Need to answer this first. Should we integrate to the norms of, Harvard Or should we integrate to the norms of, like, I don't know, CNN? Should we integrate to the norms of Fox News? Who knows? This is the Elon tweet that kind of kicked everything off. There's like another Balaji tweet that kind of kicked everything off. This is kind of interesting. It's similar to the Vermeule point. Yeah. In light of Vivek's comment about culture, I'm reminded by the observation about how much homegrown talent, of which there is plenty, has been redirected to pointless and impressive feats of technical excellence. None of this has to do with lionizing Jocks or innate defects in motivation or whatever, but actively suppressing the recruitment and deployment of this talent towards more productive ends. Yeah, and the quote tweet is like, you know, speedrunning and competitive like video game players. That's always fascinating to me because it's just like, it's truly something that requires like a very high degree of competence to be like, you know, a Sekiro speedrunner, or, you know, all of these things, all of these like, you know, skill games. I think I'm still subscribed to like a few Smash Melee channels. And like it's kind of like the thing with gamers as well is that it's like the same thing as with Jocks. You know, these are very competent people, as Lomez is saying. And yeah, it's like, why aren't these people doing more interesting things? On one hand, like, this is just what they want to do, right? On one hand, this is like the burden of liberty. And I don't think it's necessarily just because, you know, just because they're not able to get a job. I don't think that's true. I think, first of all, many of them have jobs. Many of them have or had day jobs that most of the time paid better than, you know, speedrunning on Twitch or whatever. Like, second of all, you know, is that, I don't think that's the causal pattern for anything. Like, is that really a causal pattern? Like, oh, I can't get a job, so I'm gonna like Twitch stream and I'm gonna be like, you know, the Super Mario Brothers speedrunner record holder. That's not the pathway. Like, you look at the backgrounds of many of these people, they're like usually people with like successful jobs, usually in like, you know, finance or software specifically, who end up, you know, starting this thing as like a side, you know, side thing, as like a hobby, and then, you know, becoming a full-time streamer, usually taking a pay cut to do so. And they just want to. So I think this like causal pathway is just wrong. This causal pathway is just not true. Like, I'm sorry, like I have a lot of respect for the underlying point, like the underlying idea of like, okay, there's a malaise in American culture, but the malaise is not that they can't get a job. Like, these people, like, I know a few top speedrunners personally, and they literally quit jobs at like Meta, and they quit the job because, like, you know, it wasn't satisfying for them. That maybe gets to something more significant in this malaise, but they find, you know, the speed running to be actually something that's much more meaningful than, you know, what they were doing before, than what they could make even more money doing. And that, like, that points to something real. That points to something probably more important to diagnose. So I'm still sympathetic to like Lomez's comment or like project or whatever about like re-enchanting American talent or American opportunity. But it just isn't that they can't get jobs. Maybe it's that they can't get like inspiring jobs. But they can get like top paying jobs. There's apparently like a lot of cultural sympathy to sleepovers. What about MIT? What about the norms of MIT? The norms of MIT are kind of like, well, I'm really only familiar with like the MIT math and computer science departments. Um, Another kind of like me not following the trend thing is that I ended up not going to MIT to literally to take care of my Canadian girlfriend. So I lived in Canada. I went to high school in Canada, and yeah, this was. I also like didn't care much about my future at that point. In hindsight, right, this was just like a terrible idea. In hindsight, like especially working not in software, going to Waterloo instead of MIT was just like a terrible idea. People in the U.S. government recognize MIT. They have no idea what the fuck the University of Waterloo is. So like in my current career, it was like just like awful. But at that time, I was thinking like, oh, it doesn't really matter. Probably gonna do like, software or like math research or something. Which like Waterloo is fine for if you want to do math research. MIT is still better, but it's not like a huge jump. But I would say like especially in like combinatorics and graph theory, which was basically like a field that I cared about since like high school, if not earlier. Yeah, that's a good way to do it. I mean, versus the norms of Harvard, they're like two train stops apart, so they're similar in some ways, but they're a little bit different. Yeah, no. So this is the thing that I often said about Waterloo, and I think MIT is like somewhere in between. But here is often a thing that I said when describing the University of Waterloo compared to the University of Harvard, or Harvard University, whatever. So if you're looking for like top software engineers, math people, whatever, you'll probably find as many, if not slightly more, at Harvard. But you'll also find just a ton of fakes. There's so many like just straight up imposters at Harvard that are like incompetent, can't do anything, and are just like straight up bluffing. And you just won't find those people at Waterloo. You'll find like a much much smaller fraction of those people at MIT. There's just much more of a like fake it till you make it culture at Harvard, which can be useful in some jobs, but is also really corrosive to certain other jobs. Anyways, sleepovers. There's a lot of people who just like really like sleepovers. I don't know. So growing up as like a borderline Zoomer, um, I think Zoomers just like can't think of sleepovers as anything other than an excuse for various you know an excuse for sex, basically. um, I think that's like the Zoomer take, however. And maybe you support that. Maybe that's fine. But there seems to be like a very different cultural attachment to sleepovers from older people, from Xers and Boomers. Yeah, another banger Vermule tweet. This screenshot is also really worth reading. With regard to a certain order was observed, for there was not once admitted to citizenship, just as it was law with some nations, that no one deemed citizen except after 2 or 3 generations, as the philosopher says. The reason of this was that if foreigners were allowed to meddle with the affairs of a nation as soon as they settled in its midst, many dangers might occur, since foreigners, not yet having the common good firmly at heart, might attempt something hurtful to the people. More like Vermule derivative tweets. It's good. James Polis, he's been on the podcast. He's great. The sheer power and scope of tech has reached a level where, concerning matters of spiritual authority, it points beyond itself. Okay, this is another rabbit hole. I should go back to this one. I should just stop reading. But anyways, okay. So technical training alone is insufficient for political rule, but the problem with ruling nerds today is not one of mere competence, but of worship. I will open this one. I will keep it here. Put it left of the Vermeule tweet. We will come back to this one. There's a lot to talk about with this one. We will come back to it. This one's hilarious. This is what I was talking about earlier of like people just making shit up. So Aravind, a great guy. He is the founder of Perplexity, which is the third or fourth biggest AI app by users, and he's an Indian American immigrant. And like, yeah, this person is like, no AI companies were founded by Indians. And then he's just like quote tweet. He has like the thinking monocle emoji. But yeah, this is just not true. This is just not true. I think people have like narratives that they want to like shoehorn into these things, but yeah, this is just not true. There are like legitimate, grievances and legitimate political questions that people like Adrian Vermeule ask. But there's also a kind of like class of Twitter poster who is just like making shit up, and like probably doesn't help anyone. This is an important point, just like a factual claim. Part of what sparked things off was there's like an old clip of like Shahram talking about removing country caps, which was, funnily enough, introduced as like a diversity measure, right? It was introduced by basically like, I think it was bipartisan, but it was like mostly left-led, of like, oh, we should limit the amount of people from any country so we get like a diversity of immigrants. It was like the whole like diversity ideology. And Shahram is saying he wants to remove that. Like, you have just so many more, and it's not percentage, it's not based on population. It doesn't scale with population. So the country cap for India is the same it is for like, some African country with like 1 million people in it. Which is just nonsensical and comes from the fucking diversity ideology. And this sparked a lot of hate. This is a great Jeremy Kauffman post. We need to talk about how Indians are taking American jobs. In the previous generation, it would be a white guy suggesting half of all federal employees be fired. I have a reply to this. What can I say? The replacement came for Paul Ryan. Did that just like reset my scrolling? Okay. It was to prevent enclaves of immigrants, all from one countries. That was not, maybe that was one of the benefits, but that was not the rationale at the time. America has always been ridiculous about that. They've given different reasons across history. Okay. Like, maybe you can say this is like the esoteric reason. Like, maybe. I don't know. I wasn't alive then. Everyone sees Indian immigration, the way they experience. The elites see exceptional elite. The low and mid-tier tech see Indian department takeovers. Average Americans have used Indian call centers or budget hotel experiences. Group 1 can't get mad at Group 2 or 3 for imagining more of what they know. I know, I think that checks out. Yeah, I basically bookmarked a bunch of Jeremy Kauffman bangers in a row. I don't think you should take any of these too seriously, but this is just like high quality content. This is another example of like just making shit up. If you remember the SFFA v Harvard case, they had like documented evidence that it was harder to get into Harvard as an Asian than as a white, and of course, both easier than as a black or as a Hispanic. But yeah, this is you know, um, this post is really funny because you would probably have more Asia, you would have more East and South Asian percentages in, certainly in higher education, but also in, software for sure. If you repealed the Civil Rights Act. This one's really long too. Okay. Oh, the Sauger tweet is great. The Sauger tweet, this one's fantastic. I will split the difference with Vivek. The reasons Indians and other successful minorities succeed is by blending the culture of hard work and familial dedication with the American spirit of dynamism, born from the founders and the frontier spirit. Yes, exactly, correct. This is what I was talking about earlier about the Chinese Americans beating the Chinese nationals, right? Like at math Olympiads, less so with computer science Olympiads. I think China's a lot better at computer science Olympiads than math Olympiads for some reason. Or America is worse. It's really hard to tell because they're the only ones that are competitive that are consistently competitive for top two. Well, actually, I have an explanation. So I participated in the U.S. IOI selection. And I think the Chinese IOI selection is ridiculously complicated and probably a lot more rigorous and thorough, and and has like a lot less random chance to it. I'll just put it that way. So that might be why, actually. Now the question is the U.S. IMO selection more rigorous? Honestly, probably yes. It's also less consequential because of the way IMO works. This is like really getting into the weeds, but to the original point though, but with IMO, the interesting thing with IMO is that for decades, it's been the Chinese Americans versus the Chinese nationals, and the Chinese Americans have largely won. And the question is, why is that? So Sauger says, the ways Indians and other successful minorities succeed is by blending the culture of hard work and familial dedication with the American spirit of dynamism born from the founders and the frontier spirit. I tend to agree with this. Pure Asian culture encourages rote memorization, conformity, and leads to misery with little innovation. Pure modern Western culture valorizes having a good time over working hard and is inevitably is dominated by hedonism. I don't think this is actually true. I think that's true of like European culture. This is of course the case where it's so obvious, which is that like white Americans are just like so much better than white people from their from like actual European countries. I think this is true of like almost all subgroups. I think this is true with like Chinese Americans. We were literally just talking about how this is true in the IMO with Chinese Americans. I think it's true with like most East Asians and South Asians. And to be fair, there's a kind of selection effect here, right? But like, why does America make everyone just better? Let's keep reading. Culture I want to venerate is the American culture which beat the Axis powers in World War II. It had important institutional checks against hedonism, encouraged hard work, and heavily prioritized aesthetics, leadership, and social skills. Once again, the jock nerd binary is fake. I think we're increasingly seeing this in the other direction as well, with like Brian Johnson and with a lot of tech bros who lift and so on. But I've said this a couple times this stream. Top athletes are very smart people, are exceptionally smart people. In most cases. Okay. The best way to recreate that culture is an immigration moratorium, as we did in the early 1900s, which hash out our differences, decide intentionally what culture we want for our children, and end racial balkanization, which is eating us from within. We also need to prioritize education opportunity for native-born citizens instead of seeing workers as individual economic units. This is really interesting. The Sputnik era, the Sputnik moment era, early Cold War, was kind of characterized by, to some degree, less immigration. This was kind of just a reaction to, World War II as well. Less legal immigration in general, but a lot of pretty covert, I think, high-skilled immigration. Most famously, Operation Paperclip. But there was just a lot of that with Jewish scientists, with German scientists, very often on the same team, very often put on the same U.S. government teams. Apollo Project, great example. And we could do that. Well, that's actually an open question, right? The question is not can we do that, but the question is can we do that in the same way? Can we do that and keep it secret? Probably not. There's this great John Asconis op-ed about the death of the secret. That entire New Atlantis series is fantastic, but we just don't know how. We just don't know how to keep secrets. We don't know how to do the Operation Paperclip again. And that's kind of the ideal, right? A kind of public immigration moratorium, but the talent that we really, really need, we still get. That's what happened. That's what it was. That's what Operation Paperclip was. Okay. So we need to prioritize education opportunity for native-born citizens instead of seeing workers as individual economic units. This will inevitably clash with pure capitalist instincts, but it's nonetheless important nonetheless for social cohesion and strength. Too many H-1B arguments I see today are just the inverse of leftist justification for mass illegal immigration. I'll end with a plea to Americans of Indian descent: reject the growing call for Indian identity politics or DEI wokeness by another name, and instead embrace the spirit of Theodore Roosevelt. There's no room in this country for hyphenated Americanisms. While I refer to hyphenated Americans, I do not refer to nationalized Americans. Some of the very best Americans were naturalized Americans born abroad, but hyphenated American is not American at all. This is true of the man who puts native before the hyphen as the man who puts the German and Irish or English or French before the hyphen. Americanism is a matter of the spirit and the soul. Our allegiance must be purely to the United States, must unsparingly condemn any man who holds any other allegiance. But if he is heartily and singly loyal to this republic, then no matter where he was born, he's just as good an American as anyone else. This is a great quote. I do think there needs to be more assimilation. It's very interesting because some of the least assimilated Chinese communities are older. I think newer waves of Chinese immigration assimilate faster. Especially in the US. Maybe this is not true in Canada. But Mandarin speakers in the US assimilate very quickly. There are more Cantonese bubbles in the US than Mandarin bubbles in my experience. There is a very big Cantonese speaking bubble in San Francisco Chinatown, for example. Or the Vietnamese bubble in Virginia. Modern East Asian I don't know of anything about Southeast Asian or South Asian enclaves, but modern East Asian immigrants assimilate faster than East Asian immigrants from 4 or 5 decades ago. This is a fact that very few people know. Orrin McIntyre says, the tech oligarchs are valuable, they bring funding and reach sorely needed on the right. Okay, Elon wants to get to Mars, and America is at the best when he has a frontier to explore, but the tech bros are monomaniacal in the realest sense of the term. They have to be to achieve what they do. Okay. This is pretty long. Okay, basically, we don't trust the tech bros. The tech bros are interested in their own interests. If they lied for their own interests, we know who to blame. The only solution is prudence and accountability. I think this is just an extension on like the Adrian Vermeule Aristotle quote, or someone commenting on Aristotle. But it basically makes the same point as Aristotle, that there are kind of, and this is a concept that in modern times are very bastardized. But there are private goods and there are public goods, or there are there are like factional goods, and then there's the common good, right? I think that's how Aristotle would put it. That's how a lot of the Catholics would put it as well. And that's, on one hand, that's true, right? Like, if you just take the literal interpretation of that, of course, there are things that benefit me as an individual. There's things that benefit, the nation, or the world, or just the community, just the county, just the city. That's like obviously factually correct, right? That is just true. That is just that is just a component of reality. On the other hand, it's kind of misappropriated nowadays. People misuse the phrase common good all of the time. I think this is something that like Adrian Vermeule has like dedicated his life to like fighting against, is to restore the original. He's trying to restore the original meaning of common good. And like a lot of people will use that, will use common good or public good just to advocate for like anything, regardless of whether it satisfies Aristotle's definition of the common good, or Plato's definition, or whoever, right? There's there's a meme online that's like, it's a meme making fun of the right, which is like, communism is when the government does stuff. But there's an equivalent, pattern on the left, which is like, the common good is when the government does stuff. And that's actually, that's not how Aristotle defines it. In fact, most of what the government does is a handout to a select faction. That's most of what the modern government does, which is the opposite of the common good. Aristotle explicitly defines these things in tension of like the factional good and the common good. Okay. Someone who truly understands it, or we already read this one, yeah. Honestly, the Aristotle quote was better. If you don't know what this is not the current stream thumbnail, but the next stream thumbnail. It is Ampharos doing a podcast. It's from 2005. It's an official Pokemon card art. It's Ampharos doing the podcast. It's us. Okay. This tweet was a banger. We already read these two. This is unrelated, but it's a funny tweet as well. Okay. So I promised we were going to return to the James Polis tweet, which is a great tweet. We should probably settle on this before then. Okay. So I talked about the roadmap being set out by this Vermeule tweet, which is, nerds should be on top, not on top. This is broader than the immigration issue. I think we've covered both of those subpoints. Now, a nation ought to have an elite, one trained to statesmanship and judgment, or one trained to technical competence. What is statesmanship and judgment? We have already talked about this to some degree. We've talked about the common good as Aristotle or Vermeule would define it. We've talked about, succeeding in politics, winning elections, having good political judgment. And we've talked about, what limitations the kind of, tech elite might have. But I don't think that's the end of it. So Leo Strauss in this is the meme. This is every From the New World stream. Every From the New World stream. Oh, it's not from. Okay, I know why I can't find in natural right in history. It's because it's not in natural right in history. It's in what is political philosophy. Okay. But Leo Strauss in What is Political Philosophy talks about the parable of the worm. You know, could you still do science if science were a worm? No. So the parable of the worm, actually it is asking that pretty much. But the parable of the worm is that, you know, science as a process cuts up these questions into smaller and smaller pieces. And the question is, can you add those pieces up to tell you anything meaningful about the whole? Here he is particularly criticizing social science and political science specifically. But he would argue that for most social sciences, especially for political science, you've cut up the worm in so many small pieces that, like, there's no result in political science that really gets you back to political theory. And this is not true necessarily of all sciences. I would say that, you know, many theories in physics, certainly historical theories, have really unified things. You know, there are experiments in physics that build your whole model of the universe. That, you know, you can study some part of the worm. Even in biology, right? Even you know, you can take this example overly literally. You actually can look at, like, the different organs of a worm and, you know, see how they contribute to the function of the entire worm. And biology can say meaningful things about that. However, with political science, I would argue that Strauss is right. And I think the results speak for themselves. You know, the kind of Ann Seltzer bullshit poll, is this worth explaining? Basically, there was this famous pollster who just released, like, a terrible poll, and really, you know, didn't understand the electorate. She was 19 points off, which is ridiculous for polling errors. But, you know, and polling is one of the areas that are more useful in terms of political science. So Strauss has this critique of political science that it's basically, you know, it's dividing things up so infinitesimally and narrowing the frame of debate to such small empirical questions that the ultimate, you know, fate of the political system is left basically to sentiment. It's just ultimately very vibes based and not philosophical, not well reasoned, not thoroughly thought out at all. So that's what we're lacking. You know, part of that is statesmanship and judgment. There's another article called Data-Driven Defeat by Jacob Siegel. One of the greatest journalists of our time, Jacob Siegel, who wrote this article called Data-Driven Defeat, documented his time in Afghanistan, documented, you know, how many of the technologies that provided much better data, much better targeting, much better execution, distracted command from what they actually cared about. Distracted leadership from fundamental political questions that were more important than how effectively you could carry out an airstrike. Like, we want the airstrikes to work, don't get me wrong. We want the airstrikes to work, but when you have so much data and so much information to post hoc justify any kind of mistake, you make more mistakes. And you don't hold people accountable because they always have some excuse. When you have just so much information, you can always find one excuse, even for, you know, overtly terrible ideas. And that goes back to the pieces of the worm, right? Because the leadership will cherry pick, you know, one tiny piece of the worm, then they'll say, you know, this data point shows that, you know, even if things didn't go badly, we have good reason to make this mistake and make this decision. When it's a lot simpler than that. When the reality is you just made bad decisions. And that, I think, is just a crystal clear example of what Vermeule is talking about, and, you know, this entire tradition of talking about statesmanship and judgment. And that's a very different way of thinking about the world than I would say an academic view of thinking about the world. What's interesting about the founder is that the founder kind of has to do both. The founder has to make split judgments. The founder has to make judgments of philosophy, really, of kind of strategy that are not just optimizing for the KPI, that are not just, having, a hyper efficient technical process, but are making, fundamental value judgments. But the question is, do those translate over to political judgments, right? Not necessarily. And sometimes they translate they translate negatively. You learn the opposite lesson. So let's return to the James Polis tweet. The sheer power and scope of tech had reached a level where, concerning matters of spiritual authority, it points beyond itself. Technical training alone is insufficient for political rule. But the problem with ruling nerds today is not one of mere competence, but of worship. Okay. What means? I think the second half is actually easier to explain. The problem with nerds today is not one of mere competence, but of worship. It's pretty similar to Strauss's critique. It's taking it from a different angle, but the idea is that you worship. You're not just fixated on this process of kind of scientism, but you're worshiping it. You're trying to settle everything through process and through procedure and through the KPIs, and you just can't. And not only can you not do that, but it becomes a kind of false idol. And this is really interesting because I would say that in many cases the state is much more inflicted by this problem than technology companies themselves. Like there is in fact a lot more scientism going on in the Department of Defense than at Google. Or the Department of Defense is not even that bad. I'm saying this as like the Department of Defense is probably one of the more functional parts of the U.S. government, but there's still a lot of scientism going on there. There is still a lot of worship of the KPI, worship of technical training alone. And it's once again going to the critique of Strauss in Natural Right and History. That you have this worm that you've been cut up, and you're now trying to solve every problem via dissection. You're trying to solve every problem via looking at these infinitesimally small parts, and nothing you determine from those small parts can tell you anything about the whole. And so you're just in this political trap. You're just in this political trap where the authority is vested in something that is impossible to accomplish. So, I have the series called, I don't remember what it's called. I have no fucking clue what it's called. But it's my review of Leviathan and the State Theory of Thomas Hobbes. No, it's not this series. It's a series before that. Okay. Part 1 is called The Dictatorship of Dysfunction. Part 2 is The Divine Right of Founders. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, this is the one Schmidt quote I will actually read on stream today. In the 18th century, the Leviathan as Magnus Homo, as the godlike sovereign person of the state, was destroyed from within. The distinction of inner and outer became for the mortal god a sickness unto death. The mortal god is the state, by the way. In case that was not clear. But it's greater than that. Okay, but his work, the state, survived him in the form of a well-organized executive, army and police, as well as administrative and judicial apparatuses in a well-working, professionally trained bureaucracy. Or, so for a long time, the state was seen as a person, whether it was a republic, whether it was a monarchy or not. Like, the picture of the Leviathan is, like, literally a guy. It's a dude. It's this guy. He's supposed to be, the monarch is the ruler, is the Leviathan, is all-powerful, but represents the many. Acts in the will of the many. So, like, the Leviathan has a kind of godlike significance, and Schmidt actually goes into detail. I don't even cover all of this, all of the symbology. I cover some of it, but it is really worth reading in full. The Leviathan and the State Theory of Thomas Hobbes. The distinction of inner and outer, so of freedom of conscience versus the role of the state, became for the mortal god, for the state as a divine signifier, a sickness unto death. But his work, the state, survived him in the form of a well-organized executive, army and police, as well as administrative and judicial apparatuses and a well-working, professionally trained bureaucracy. So you have this historical cycle. You have this historical cycle, or this historical arc, where the state is founded on a kind of divine legitimacy. The state is founded as the Leviathan, as the godlike sovereign who protects you from the war of all against all. And it dies. And it dies by losing that divine significance. We don't really see the state as divine, really not at all. We don't view it as holding, well, it's weird because there's a difference between implicit and explicit. But explicitly, overtly, exoterically, we don't view the state as something of divine significance. This line, I write about this line a lot in this entire review, so you should read it if you care more about that. But I'm not going to elaborate on this. Not anymore, at least. But the distinction of inner and outer, this is very important. This is very important and very significant in the writing of Hobbes. Well, I don't know. That's kind of it's very relevant to the thing we're discussing, right? Which is, what is something that transcends competence, or what is something that is distracted from? It is abandoned when you idolize when you idolize technical competence. And I would say that the answer is legitimacy. You should read the article. The link to the Substack is in the description. You should read the article in full if that's what if that's something that you're interested in. Okay. Could we do experiments in politics with controls? Kind of. More so, people more so do it with like economic policies. People A/B test ads. There's like very limited, but the point that Strauss is making is that the subdivided versions, the very small, isolated, fragmented versions of these experiments, do not have significance for the whole. They only have significance for the part, for their narrow domain. That's the problem. So at the scale that would be necessary to address Strauss's criticisms, I would argue no. Some universities might have classes that aim to teach statesmanship or something like it. I wonder how they do it, like military colleges are supposed to. I mean, in history, some of this is done through studying philosophy, studying history, one-on-one tutoring, studying the classics, Theoretically, there are still people who do that today. Theoretically, hypothetically, there are still philosophers today. At like Harvard, there's a Harvard philosophy department. Theoretically, there's also a Harvard classics department, and also a Harvard history department. This is all in theory. I have no idea, lol. It is a problem how young people worship Elon, but I don't think that's it. I don't have any simple comment on the Elon worship. Actually, I have this article, The Divine Right of Founders, that you know would give the detailed commentary on the Elon worship that's necessary. That I think explains some of this. Do I just assert this? Okay, I think I understand what I was doing here. There are two very famous Schmidt works, Political Theology and The Concept of the Political. And in my opinion, political theology is clearly the better one. It is the one that is just so incredibly significant today. Both of them are significant, but this one, only political theology is, of the two, only political theology is incredibly significant. This is also a banger. This entire concept that, you know, the state is not divine. That's not the political theory the state was founded upon. And I think the fact that it's not the political theory the state was founded upon explains a lot about the deterioration and recontextualization of the state. What do I mean by this? This is man, just read it. I don't know, maybe I should read the article. What's the clearest? Well, this is the puzzle that I introduce, right? Let me just summarize this in brief. This is the puzzle that I introduce, which is that right now, you know, to a lot of people, startups or like tech companies have a lot more divine significance than the state. And I don't think that's an accident at all. I think, first of all, when it comes to the state, that was an explicit decision to desacralize the state. Schmidt talks about this in Leviathan and the State Theory of Thomas Hobbes as well. And I think it's like pretty overtly clear. Maybe it's not clear that, you know, there was a time when this was not the case, but it's pretty clear that that's like the overt, you know, social teaching now. That the state is not divine, that the state is enthusiastically not divine. Like, you learn this in the public school, you know, that's what separation of church and state means. That's what you learn in the public school. To the extent that a lot more people have, you know, trust and faith, like genuine, like capital F faith in tech companies. And like that's a problem to some degree. But shouldn't you, to some degree, have faith in many things? Faith in the world. You know, if you're a Christian, faith in the world created by, you know, your loving God. And what does it say that you do not have faith in the state? So that's the puzzle. Why is it that there's so much more inspiration coming from the figure of the founder than the figure of the president? Why is there so much more inspiration coming from Elon than from Joe Biden? Maybe even than for Donald Trump. Well, less so this year, but maybe more, certainly more so than I think than Trump in 2016. Why is that? There are several reasons. One we already talked about, which is the intentional desacralization of the state. Another is that there is a real mythology in Silicon Valley. There is a real kind of like Thiel, Girard mythology that's been set up. And that like kind of comes from the humanities, right? It comes from Girard, it comes from, to some degree, it comes from Strauss and Plato. answer that Schmidt would provide is that, you know, freedom of conscience, this is what he means by the separation of inner and outer. Freedom of conscience is something that has to carry divine significance. It always carries divine significance. And this was explicit in Hobbes' philosophy, right? The explicit reason for freedom of conscience was, the war between Catholics and Protestants, was the 30 Years' War, was this intense, inter-European conflict. And the reason for freedom of conscience was that, you wouldn't want the divine significance of one faith imposed through the state, and especially imposed through conquest of other states. That just dissolves into the war of all against all. That just devolves into, killing each other. But now we have these incredibly powerful and determinative forces that have no legitimacy. And that creates other problems. Of course, some people might say, well, that's changing. Well, we'll look at Trump, look at, the divine providence, look at, so many religious Americans, so many Christian Americans. Trump is bringing a revival of, the divine right of the president. Maybe. I think he has a while to go. Maybe it's not bad, but he has a while to go. We have a while to go to a kind of statesmanship and judgment. Okay. That, I think, is the right amount of reading from the current thing. And from the article. Any thoughts on DeepSeek v3? I know that's off topic. Yeah, well, we're wrapping up the stream now, so I'm pretty happy to answer that now. Probably would not be happy to answer that in the middle. Yeah, we can talk about DeepSeek v3. The one take I have on DeepSeek v3 is that they're probably fudging model distillation costs. I think I had this as a tweet as well. So their like training cost for their model, which was on tier with like 4.0, and I think like somewhere between 4.0 and slightly worse than 4.0, and like slightly better than Sonnet, which was, they claim that their training cost was around $5.5 million, which is very low, which is 100 or at least like 50 times lower than many of these training costs for comparable models. So why is that? One reason is that they're just way better. One reason is that there's this very common practice called AI model distillation, which is essentially reducing a larger model into a smaller model through some series of steps, either using the output of the larger model to train the smaller model, or otherwise modifying the larger model to kind of shrink it down into a smaller model. And one thing you can do that's kind of deceptive is that you can train the bigger model, kind of wave away its training cost. Kind of do a little bit of tax fraud on the training cost, and use its output to train the smaller model, and only mark the training cost of the smaller model. And that might be what they're doing. To me, it's a little beyond credible. Not impossible, but it's a little beyond credible that it's only $5.5 million. That is the take that I have so far about DeepSeek. But I think either way, the performance results are impressive, right? I think the performance results, that kind of thing, is pretty hard to fake, because people can just take it and continue testing it. And like maybe they're like slightly exaggerated or whatever, but it's not going to be like completely off. It's going to be something close to what they publish. I think that's just like the general pattern. That's just like generally that's just what happens. right, my voice is getting very tired. Maybe you can tell that. 2 streams today, but it was fun. And I think, honestly, articulating some of these, especially the first stream, really helped work through some of my longer-term philosophical project. So thank you. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for commenting, asking questions, giving me suggestions in these streams. I've, taken a lot of suggestions from the first stream. I think it's gotten better, and I think it will still get better. So leave a comment. Let me know how the stream could be better. Comment, subscribe. As you can probably tell, these are, we're just starting out, and a great way to help us out is to let a friend know, in person or online. Share the stream, especially if you enjoyed it, if you think there was something valuable that we talked about today. And there's a clip button now. You can make clips. All of that is hopefully quite useful. And I would be grateful for any and all of it. You can subscribe. You can for future streams and videos. I'll also begin uploading episodes of the podcast to this channel in the new year. And that is all. See ya.